Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In here on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica studios recapping a wild end to the major season, the U.S. Open in the books. Joined now by a special guest, first time on the show. He's an on-air host and tennis commentator, covered Wimbledon, U.S. Opens, to name a few. He's been in the booth. He's been an on-court interviewer. He's written and produced about tennis and other sports, including the Olympic Games. It's Nick McCarvel now joining the show. Nick, thank you for coming on Tennis Channel Inside In.
Hey, Mitch, thanks for having me. And I think I'm well rested post US Open, but no promises.
Yeah, we had to give it a couple days before.
Yeah, we did.
After the trophy ceremony. A lot to digest and dissect from the US Open. But first off, as a first-time guest, and I'm always curious about this for my personal interest as well, but, you know, kind of your path to the big-time tennis. And I know it started as a college student in Seattle up from the Pacific Northwest. I know there were some stops, NBC Sports, with like producing for figure skating, then USA Today. How did your journey lead you to becoming one of the prominent voices and getting to chat with some of the best and brightest stars in the game of tennis?
Well, I don't know if I would say prominent, but this has become my work, and it's built over the years. You mentioned USA Today. I was there for 2 years as their tennis reporter across the Grand Slams. I was the Serena beat reporter, I say, in 2015 when she was going after the calendar slam, which is a pretty wild ride. You use that for the US Open. That was quite wild that year. I just always knew that this was the sport that I wanted to exist in, and I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to exist within it. And I'm actually still figuring that out, to be honest. But, I've had that great opportunity of working with NBC, working with USA Today. I've freelanced for The Guardian, for The Times, for a bunch of different outlets. And I slowly in 2017, Mitch, I started moving away from writing. I still do plenty of writing. I'm working on a couple articles right now, but hosting, commentating, reporting, that's become more of my beat, my regular work. So I just spent, 2 weeks with the US Open team. I was one of their world feed commentators, and then hosted a morning digital show with Monica Puig, which was really fun. And then I was also on the American Express radio team as well. So just trying to align all of my passions. And I don't think I do any of it perfectly, but it's a passion and I work hard at it. And I appreciate being a small part of the sport that we love.
Well, I think hustling and willing to try different things is a lesson for anybody starting out or still kind of working their way up and working their way through in the industry. But was there, and I guess we can kind of move on after this, but was there one thing that you kind of discovered, maybe you weren't necessarily set out to do, but you discovered you had a passion for and you found that you were kind of good and willing to do along the way?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned I went to college in Seattle, and I went to I went to a very writing intensive, writing focused newspaper journalism program. Our professors were all newspaper folks, and this was at like the pretty outset of Twitter. I graduated in 2008. And so people are kind of like, what are these social media platforms? And, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but as my career has developed, I've realized that I have a passion for and a knack for being on camera and hosting and being conversational in these types of environments, which oftentimes can be awkward or challenging for folks who don't necessarily know how to do it or haven't done it before. I think with sort of the podcastification of our society and TikTok, you could throw in there too, more people are comfortable with it. And I think it's changed in the last decade or so. We don't have to go down that social media path, but taking my writing roots and applying them into interviews, live shows. I'm always still learning and trying to understand and do differently, do better. But that's been kind of the biggest curve in the road for me, I guess.
Yeah, timing is everything. And you coming into the professional world right when Twitter was kind of blowing up and social media, it's really worked out well for you and for other people that are kind of the same age.
For better and for worse. Let's be honest.
That's true. And speaking with hosting, as we kind of get into the US Open, what was it like hosting the Ukraine Play for Peace event? I know Iga Swiatek was at the forefront of that, Rafael Nadal. It was a lighter moment. I think tennis players, we like to see these moments of them having fun. And I was struck by just the camaraderie of the event also for a good cause. What was that like hosting that event?
Yeah, the Play for Peace event, as you mentioned, took place right before the US Open, and Patrick McEnroe was sort of the main host of it. And then Blair Henley and myself, we co-hosted it with him. First off, I just think it was so cool that the USTA did that. I know that there were some, differing opinions, and I know Marta Kostyuk definitely aired her grievances about Vika's involvement, and then Vika wasn't involved. But all in all, to see players come around a certain cause, I think that's huge. I think we saw it a lot during COVID. We also saw it a lot, or we did see it in 2020, I think, right before the pandemic when the Australian bushfires were happening. And TA did sort of a similar event, but this one was different. It was a mix of generations, and seeing Iga like totally freak out, like she was melting down playing with Rafa, and having the Canadians there, having some of the young up and coming Americans. And to be honest, Blair and I were on a couple of these calls to get ready for it and planning. And just like the fan support was awesome. And I actually was a little bit nervous, to be honest, that Rafa played first, and then, the players didn't stay on court so they could go. And I was nervous that, we had a crowd of, I think, 5,000 plus. I was nervous that people were just going to leave after Rafa, but the energy was awesome. New York comes together. I'm a New Yorker. They like supporting causes like this. There's a huge Ukrainian population here. We had some really cool local iterations, like weaving into the night, and a local Ukrainian kid sang their national anthem. We had Veselka represented, which is a local Ukrainian place in the East Village, and they're raising funds for refugees. So I think in the end they raised $2 million, and to see players like Tsitsipas, I think threw in an extra 10K. And yeah, just the camaraderie, like you say, to see some of those players out there in different ways, especially when we have the men and the women. I think that's what makes our sport special.
Certainly fun. It was a great environment, great atmosphere. You mentioned Blair; she's been on this show a few times, and we gotta make sure that we get the official. I mean, if you were to undercut her for the Badosa engagement thing, I don't think she would like that too, Conley. So maybe
that's I leave that kind of reporting to Blair Henley.
Yeah,
only Blair.
That and the videos, that and the imitation videos, I think are hurdling for sure right now.
Sure.
Looking at the U.S. Open, a lot of storylines, and I think we can kind of start with this. I mean, we're all prisoners of the moment at some time, but a lot of people coming out in the heels of this thought this was one of the most drama-filled majors that we've seen in a while, from top to bottom, starting with the Serena situation and her unofficial last matches, Alcaraz and Iga winning trophies at the end, and a lot of drama along the way. Do you look at this in hindsight a couple of days later as being one of the most dramatic, drama-filled majors we've had in quite some time?
It's funny. I mean, now we're 72 hours removed, or near to that, as you and I record this. Yes, I agree with you, but I also came out of last year's US Open being like, wow, that was amazing. And I think that was more based on, I had done the 2020 Open as a commentator. We were on site, and it was jarring, to be there and see no fans, and it was desolate. And I mean, obviously it was a certain moment in time. So then to have all the fans back last year, it just kind of felt like, wow, this is, and I don't think they were quite at capacity last year, but this year, I mean, I think the Serena, it felt like the Super Bowl. I've never been to the Super Bowl, but it felt like the Super Bowl for a week straight. She played 4 night sessions, including that Thursday with Venus and doubles. And each of those matches were dramatic in their own ways. And I just thought, what a cool way to celebrate Serena. And of course, she wants to go out fighting. She wants to go out winning, essentially. And I think actually she felt like if she would have started a few months earlier, she would have been a contender, which the way she played against Kontaveit and Tomljanovic was, because I was at Wimbledon, I was in Toronto, I was in Cincinnati, and I watched all those matches, and the way that she leveled up, I know she worked really hard for that, but the drama was sort of nonstop. I mean, Frances Tiafoe and the run that he had, Coco Gauff, I think the energy that those players bring, especially to an American audience, to have Michelle Obama, front and center at the men's semifinal, Alcaraz Tiafoe, that was incredible. And, I also think when you have that drama and then it can play out for the fans, watching Garcia's run, watching Swiatek honestly play pretty average into the quarterfinals and then figure it out. I did courtside for radio for the women's final, and it was literally packed. I mean, and the energy was good in there. And you just look at the stories. I think sometimes we worry about stars or rivalries, and I think those are important, stars and rivalries, but I also think stories. And that's what I know you're passionate about, Blair and I are passionate about too, is having an Ons, having an Iga, and then also having a Casper and having a Carlitos, having things that people can really get their fangs into and get interested in and support. I think that's what makes sport, and that's why we love it. And yeah, no disagreement for me on the drama level of the Open. But it might be a little bit of like, let's give it a little more breathing room and see what lasts.
Yeah, every major is going to have a degree of drama and intrigue. The storylines here were pretty deep. There were many of them, and you mentioned New Yorkers being passionate about tennis earlier. They appreciate great tennis too, and that's what also was delivered in the women's game all the way through the Sinner Alcaraz match. I mean, it just doesn't get much better than that. And then you had, Tiafoe, and the other side of it too was the Americans, not just Serena, but Tiafoe, Coco, that kind of captivated the fan base too. A lot of different ways to take this, but Carlos Alcaraz winning his first major championship and getting to number one at 19 years old. Remarkable stuff. He goes 5 sets, three rounds in a row, fourth quarterfinal and semis, wins in 4 over Casper Ruud. A lot to be impressed with, Nick, but I think the biggest thing for me is he spent nearly 24 hours on court. And to be young, I guess, right? Like he feels like, I mean, we were all ready for this moment, Nick, but I guess the only thing would be, are you surprised it happened so fast? Like he was anointed to be the best. He's here for his 20th birthday.
Yeah, well, and that's what, yeah, exactly. As you put it, well put. I think that's what has blown people away, right? The fact that he was able to come through the way that he did, those almost 24 hours on court. I think it also shows, sometimes I worry our sport has become too physical. Like for the guys best of 5, like are we finding the best tennis player? Or are we finding the best athlete? But I think Djokovic, Nadal, Federer have asked of men's tennis in the last decade plus to be the best athlete and the best tennis player. So for Alcaraz to come in and do what he did, I think it was huge. It is huge to have Juan Carlos Ferrero and that whole team around him. That video of what was it, like 20 dudes around Carlos Alcaraz singing on the stage, Campione. I am surprised, to answer you plainly, and I think it's also, this is why we love sport. This is why we love tennis. This is why we ask sort of these athletes to go out, and there's no givens, right? Coming into this event, a lot of people, I think, thought that Medvedev would just find his way, kind of the way that Iga found her way. And he ran into Nick Kyrgios, who we haven't even mentioned. I mean, what a story he was during the Open too. So Alcaraz, I think what I love about him is there is a certain element, and I've watched him obviously a lot before this US Open, but there's a certain element of every point is zero. Like he plays every point as zero. And I think that's really hard to teach. I don't know how early that, or like if that's something that Juan Carlos has really instilled in him, but I spent a lot of time watching their box, and oftentimes it was some sort of signal of like, take yourself out of the moment, whether it's break point, match point, set point, whatever it is. And it was all about calming down and kind of, signals of next point and just focus here, which I think is something, an intangible that goes along with all of his insane highlight reel Sports Center tennis.
He has so many gifts, and obviously we can just be here forever talking about it. The movement, the shot making, the flair. I mean, he has it all, but it was the mental makeup. It was between the ears that also impressed me the most. The fact that he had moments where he was tested, those 5 setters where he was kind of vulnerable, and he found a way to fight through it. He found a way to problem solve and overcome. Really winning when he didn't have his A game in some of the early round matchups impressed me more than anything, because we all knew the gifts were here and that he's got the skill to be as good as anybody on tour, but to be able to mentally overcome these challenges so early and really accept the role of, when Nadal was out, kind of the favorite in this tournament. He wore that hat well. The mental composure, I know Juan Carlos Ferrero has a lot to do with that, but he just brought up the right way and seems to be focused on just being better every single day, every single point, as you said.
Yeah, no, again, I think that's really, you're pointing out, very specific things that went well or that he's doing well to earn that championship. And I think Swiatek, you could make the same sort of argument, is that she wasn't playing her best tennis. I mean,
yeah,
some of that tennis was downright ugly. The way that she was able to win against Yulia Niemeyer, coming back in that match, beating Sabalenka. Sabalenka was playing really well, But, look at the great champions of our sport. Serena is the perfect example. And I actually thought, I watched a lot of Coco Gauff in Toronto, and she's starting to really figure out how to manage matches and when she's not playing her best tennis to win.
Yeah.
And, I actually thought that was, yeah, the Sinner match kind of stands on its own. Obviously, you can't sort of compare it to Tiafoe or to the Casper Ruud final, but I just it's crazy to watch someone to do it and watch him do it in real time, and the fact that we've kind of watched this year. And let's be honest, Mitch, he had a little of a dip after that French Open quarterfinal loss. He loses to Zverev. First top 10 loss, I think, or first top 10 loss at a major, whatever the stat was. First time Zverev had beaten someone in the top 10 at a major. And, then the grass was tough for him, obviously, because he hadn't played on it a lot. And then had not a terrific summer. It felt like kind of the angel wings had been clipped. So to come through the way that he did, the Cilic Challenge, Sinner, and Tiafoe, those back-to-back-to-backs, and then to physically figure out, there are a couple of days where he didn't come to site. So I think that's obviously good team management. And I'm still, as you see me verbally struggle to wrap my mind around that Carlos Alcaraz is world number one and a Grand Slam champion both, but he earned it, didn't he?
Juan Carlos Ferrero also said today, I don't know if you saw this, he's probably playing at about 60% of his potential, which maybe, but if he is, that's frightening. If this is 60% of anything, my question to the rest of the tour would be, what are we even doing here?
Yeah, I did see that, actually. I thought that was kind of a funny quote of really? But I mean, listen, he knows this game as intimately as possible. And also just that putting that kind of statement out there is pointed. So it felt like a little bit of a yeah, we just won the US Open, come at us, that sort of thing.
He's back playing with the Spanish Davis Cup team now. So to be young, I guess, is one way to look at it.
Right.
More with Nick McCarvel here on Tennis Channel Inside. And I want to give a proper shout out to Casper Ruud, who lost in the final of the tournament, had a chance at number one, and played Alcaraz very well. 4 sets, heavy match, did a great job to get to the final. And the point I want to make on Casper is there was this misconception with his game, with his style of play, but also with him being quote unquote, and I use this not in a pejorative way, but the clay court specialist tag was put on him. The improvements he's made in the last year have been remarkable. And I just think it speaks to just having a proper work ethic. And as you said, as we said with Alcaraz, the mindset kind of got him here. He has a very positive approach to the game. And I think it carried him to number 2 in the world, which is, nothing to hold your hat at. And it gives him, like he said in the post-game ceremony, that added motivation to still chase something.
Well, and I'm curious of how many tennis players, current pros, are calling up the Rafael Nadal Academy right now. Because in a lot of different ways, that's not the only reason for Casper Ruud's success, but he really is the only. I know there's a few juniors there, and maybe there's a few other players that have based themselves there as well. But Mouratoglou has built this academy where everyone wants to go and train there. Well, what about getting some of the impact of what Rafa's been able to do and build? And I think that's the Ruud family did that. They've been there for years. And so I called Casper's match for the world feed against Tim van Rijthoven. I think that was the second or third round. And, I think Tim won the first set, or the first set was really tight. And there was no panic. It was like Casper trusting that he's going to be able to find that level and to just kind of turn the key. I think maybe he was left feeling 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional against a player who is 4, 5, 6-dimensional in Alcaraz in the final, but absolutely not a clay court specialist. And now you kind of wonder, can he back it up? How does he sort of figure out a way to make himself into the number 2? He's earned that ranking. But I think it'll be an interesting few weeks and months. And I also wonder for Ruud, it's so understated. Oftentimes I don't feel like we get kind of the full story of his feelings or what's going on behind the scenes. But I think there's some players kind of hide the fire pretty well. I think he hides the fire. Yeah. And I think that there is a ultimate determination within that family for him to really be a Grand Slam champion in the future.
Some players hide the fire pretty well. Some just, let it rain expletives on their own player box every single point, which
this
I mean,
is
there, and we can kind of transition into the Kyrgios talk with that, because there's something to be said about Casper Ruud's approach to the game and taking it one match, 1 point at a time.
Yeah.
I think Nick's great, and I think it's awesome that he's putting it in gear, but it is going to be a challenge for him to go 7 straight with the depth of the men's game. And, the unfortunate thing in that Khachanov match, coming off of just masterclass tennis against Medvedev, was the fact that he was a little banged up. His A game wasn't there. Those are the moments that I think champions are really made, is like we said with Alcaraz, finding a way after you get broke and you're on track to win the Tiafoe match in 4, you lose the tiebreak. Now you got to win in 5. Kyrgios's game, there's so much to like about it. I just wonder if 7 matches in a row is a realistic expectation given where he's at and kind of his approach to everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think it is realistic. I think obviously he only played the 6 at Wimbledon, and then here, into the quarterfinals. So that's 5, and that masterclass, as you said, against Medvedev. And I think that there's always more to Kyrgios under the surface than we believe there to be, or we give him credit for. But I think that that's also what he's built. He's built sort of this protective casing so that we can, you can focus in on the expletives or the going at the box or whatever it is, when actually, in truth, there is this greater depth to him as a person and as a player. And it's up to him if he wants to fully, as you're saying, challenge himself in that way and then tap into it, which is not, it's so easy. And I did the US Open podcast to kind of wrap it up. And I think oftentimes, we have these back and forths of 7 matches in a row and the physicality and the focus and all that kind of stuff, that's the discussion, right? But imagine actually having to do it, the heat and the humidity and the pressure and the press and the body and all of these different things, which makes the Alcaraz run even more impressive. Throw Swiatek in there, throw all of the champions in there. And so, it's up to Nick to control that. And if he wants to make that happen, I think he's 100% capable of winning 7 intense pressure-filled matches in a row. It's just, is he going to be able to ask that of himself? And then does he execute? And also, you've got to have a little luck go your way. Carlos Alcaraz saved a match point against Jannik Sinner. He could have hit a let cord, there's just anything can happen. Right.
Yeah. He, in a way, I kind of like that he was throwing rackets at the end, that he cares, that he was that upset, that he felt like he squandered a chance, which I do appreciate. There is something to be said about every match going out there. You beat Medvedev, you beat world number 1. It doesn't mean anything in the next match. You have to take the court at 0-0. It doesn't give you any equity. So again, it's hard to win majors. It's not just a Kyrgios problem. There's a reason why so many people can't do it, even world-class tennis players.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the women's game, I do want to get your thoughts on Tiafoe's run.
Yeah.
Not to be understated what this breakthrough meant. I mentioned last week, I'm so happy that it not only happened, but it happened here in New York at this major.
Yep.
You understand why the crowd likes him so much, his brand of tennis, his enthusiasm for the game, but also, I mean, for lack of a better term, his guts in these big moments. He's not somebody that is afraid to go for his shots in the pressure situation. And that's an underrated fact in what makes a lot of these tennis champions. So going to the semis, losing in 5 to the eventual champion and Alcaraz, world number 1, just hats off to what Frances did at Flushing Meadows.
No, it was huge. I totally agree. And, to do it, to beat Rafa. And, there's obviously so many things to be impressed by in the tournament. 2 matches impressed me the most. Tiafoe beating Rublev after beating Nadal and the way that he did. And then Tomljanovic beating Samsonova in the match after she beat Serena. Samsonova was on a 13-match winning streak, and Isla saved 8 set points in that first set. So those were the 2 standout performances to me. And the crazy thing, Mitch, that I don't feel like people have really talked about that much is Frances didn't really play that great against Alcaraz in the semifinal. I mean, he definitely had bursts of it. And don't get me wrong, there were some amazing points. But what was the serve percentage in the end? Like 40% first serves in. Like, imagine if he actually had a really good serving night. Like, what would we be? He was just always under pressure on his serve. But to go 35,000 feet, Michelle Obama, the support from, you know, the tweet from LeBron James, was it Bradley Beal, the Wizards player, you know, all of those. And also I did sideline for the men's semi as well that night. And there was just like, it kind of felt like the week prior. It wasn't the same as Serena, but there was this buzz about, and Kurt Streeter did a really great article in the New York Times and spoke a lot to Brian Shelton, Ben's dad and the Florida coach, former pro, about how there's still not great Black male representation in college tennis or in men's tennis. So can Frances be this sort of beacon of new energy? And I thought the fact that he had that run the way that he did, I just thought that was amazing. And yeah, I hope it's not a blip. And I think that Wayne Ferreira's doing the right work with him. But I hope the sky's the limit for Frances. He's a standout human being.
The process, I completely agree with what Wayne Ferreira is doing, and I hope it's not a blip. It's fair to speculate, unfortunately, because we've seen this before, where one run is great, but it doesn't guarantee you, just like we were talking with Kyrgios, any more success. I completely agree. The wins after beating an all-time great, that shows mental strength, because it's so natural. It's a human natural feeling to just have that adrenaline dump of, I just, to put it in perspective, like I just beat Nadal, I just beat Serena. That next match to go out and win. It's why so many players lose that following match, is because it's hard to mentally get yourself to that place again. So just hats off
against Rublev, no less. Like, come on, Andre Rublev is a bona fide top 10 player.
He is. This U.S. Open was special in a lot of ways, and Frances Tiafoe deserves to be a part of it. I did want to get your thoughts, kind of switching kind of the women's game, and I want to circle back to what you said, because it's another thing that I agree with completely. Iga Swiatek winning this major without playing her best tennis, putting it into proper perspective now. I mean, that's very Novak Djokovic like, to just kind of get to the final, win it without even hitting your apex. But first U.S. Open title, third major, 21 years old. Talking about stacking up a resume and stacking up accolades, this is a Hall of Fame resume already, and dare I say, she hasn't even begun to hit her peak yet.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, a lot of when I was doing the sideline reporting I did a few of those matches for the radio. A lot of my job is to intently watch the boxes, because you want to see what the cadence is, and really what Thomas Witkowski has done with her. And obviously it was already there with Peter Scherspatowski previously, but Thomas has come in, and I think, you know, being able to, you know, not trusting the flight of the balls and not feeling, you know, she didn't have a great Toronto or Cincinnati. So to come in, I think she was helped by the Serena situation, because she was a little bit under the radar in that sense. And then also we had the Coco storyline, the Ons Jabeur, Caroline Garcia, let's not forget that run either, where Iga was kind of like the third, fourth, or fifth thought in the sense of the women's draw. I actually ran into Iga on Monday. I went to coffee with a friend, and randomly she was at the same coffee shop, and I think she had just done the Today Show, but she has built herself into this champion, you know, and as you say, you know, champions adjust, and she made those adjustments, and she was not playing spectacular tennis, you know, struggled against Lauren Davis, struggled against Niemeyer, came back from a breakdown twice against Sabalenka. The thing that I impressed me the most is that she did near to that apex in the final. Like Ons was playing a little bit. Ons wasn't there, especially in the first set. But the way that Iga, I mean, she was almost up 6-2 for love. You know, I think she was a point or two away a couple times. So there was that, and then she obviously fought some demons to cross that finish line. Yeah, and it seems like, you know, everything's there to kind of continue to try to manage it, but nothing's a given. And I just thought it was an absolute standout performance for sure.
The Sabalenka match, if you talk about adjustments, she's down 4-2 and she wins 16 of the last 20 points essentially to win the match. Her ability to adjust, her ability to kind of think out there, and I think she's so locked in mentally and with her focus on the game in each match. And I mean, obviously no one's probably gonna get to the heights at Serena, or we're not gonna have this like true just win every slam type situation. But you watch Iga play and you understand why she's always a factor in all these tournaments. And we've talked about the depth of the women's game, Nick, and how there's been a lot of parity. We got number 1 versus number 2 in the final of this tournament. So again, credit to Ons Jabeur, who's a pioneer in many ways, but she got back to her second straight major final and ran into the best player in the world. So there's no shame in what Ons did. It's just a tough matchup for anybody to play Iga.
Yeah, no. I totally agree. And actually, the Swiatek comeback against Sabalenka in the semis was very Serena-esque. You know, it's down. What did she win? 16 of the final 20 points.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fact that you're down 4-2, that you're not playing your best tennis, and Sabalenka was playing well, and also Sabalenka is just continuing to hit up against that wall. So how does she figure it out? You know,
that's 3 straight major semis. She made 3 major semis. She's lost 6-4 in all 3 third sets. So she's so close. And I still maintain that her apex is as good as anyone's in the game. It's just, can she find a way to get through? Maybe it is mental. I don't, she's really there talent wise.
It feels to me a little bit like, okay, if you're only going to play one way, if you're only going to play Sabalenka ball, then you have to be able to have a little bit of a gear up or gear down, or you're going to have to be crisp mentally to be able to figure out how to win matches like that. And if I can just a quick word on Jabeur, I think getting to another major final, doing it at the US Open, I don't think it was a final any of us anticipated her to, I think she had been to the 3rd round previously. And she came out like so high against Rybakina in the Wimbledon final. And I feel like she almost came out like too relaxed in this one. Like it was kind of like, okay, everything's going to be fine. And Iga was like, no, I'm going to go for your throat. So, can she make that adjustment? But, the energy within that stadium, 23,000 people, the Turkish flag, the Tunisian flags and the Polish flags, the red all over the stadium. It was a really, really cool moment for our sport. And I think continuing to show when you've got these national stars, both Ons and Iga are home nation national names. It's only going to help grow the sport, obviously, but women's tennis in particular.
Yeah, they're the best. I mean, they're clearly the best to ever come from their country. I think that's not even debatable at this point. And the fact that Ons was able to follow up a major performance with this one, improbable. The win over Garcia, I don't think many of us saw coming given Garcia's level and what she had been doing. It was remarkable stuff. So again, congrats to both. Obviously, Iga getting the title. And then also a word on Coco Gauff, who, fell in the quarters, but keeps getting a little closer. Like we're getting the incremental steps. Obviously, the final step, winning the major, is the hardest one, but there's still progress every year, still a teenager. And now it seems like we're getting to that. It's only a matter of time situation, but I was impressed. I know it didn't end the way she wanted, but I was again impressed with her ability to kind of handle the moment and handle the role that she's been given in this tennis world.
Yeah, and I think she just ran into a red hot player who was still, on a streak. And obviously Garcia came back to earth in the next round. But I think Coco, especially like that Zhang Shui match, and there were a couple others as well, Maddie Keys, where she just, she figured out a way to win. And I mentioned I watched a fair amount of her this summer. I watched the Rybakina match as well as the Sabalenka match in Toronto on the grandstand, it can be quite windy on that court. And she managed both of those matches like impeccably well. And I think that's where a lot of the doubles comes into play.
Yeah.
I think we, the media, like we often rush stories like Coco, like, wow, it would be amazing if, and she already made the French Open final. But I think that you're right. The come up is still happening, and like, slow your horses, everyone. Like she's making her way, and, bringing in Juan Tadero, and, to be able to have that, that sort of extra, that move surprised me a little bit. And I think having that, obviously, Corey Sr. having that sort of input, it has been big for them.
Couple more things with Nick McCarvel before we wrap this up. It's been a pleasure talking about the US Open. I want to ask you when you think we'll see Rafa again. Do you think this was it for him at the end of the year? Obviously you got the child coming up, which is awesome news for him and his family, but was banged up, loses to Tiafoe in a throwing 4th round match. When do you think we see Rafa again?
I mean, great question. I have no idea. He's meant to go to Laver Cup. I'm leaving for Laver Cup on Saturday, so see you there, Rafa. I don't know.
So yeah,
I I think it's quite possible he plays there. I think it's possible he plays a couple more tournaments and then plays the season-ending finals. Is he going to play Davis Cup? Obviously, there's a lot of involvement there with Spain, and I know that he was a big part of that when they brought it to Madrid a few years ago. The body's banged up, right? And so, obviously the win, you take nothing away from Francis, but was Rafa at 100%? Probably not. But I just don't know how much longer they can continue to push the body and not have it impact a slam. He got through Australia. He barely got through Paris. Like, let's not forget that. And then what took him out actually at Wimbledon was an injury. So, it's hard to imagine how much tennis he, can keep playing with the body. He's going to be able to win matches always, right, Mitch? Like 2, 3, 4 matches. But I mean, he wants to win more slams. And so he wants to win the biggest titles in the sport. So that was a non-answer to your question.
no, it's fair because no one really knows, but he's not going to just mail it in. Like if he's healthy, he loves the game too much. I still maintain it goes with repeating. Nobody gets the injuries he gets. Like he gets the most non-tennis injuries. Like even the one where he kind of hit his face with the racket. I'd never seen that before. Like a rib injury. I was wondering, like, how do you crack a rib playing tennis? But it's like only Rafa with his intensity, apparently. Yeah, I did want to mention too before we, paying all our respects to the people at the U.S. Open, the women's doubles team of Krejcikova and Siniakova getting the career slam, and they beat the Americans McNally and Townsend, who put up an admirable fight. Taylor Townsend off of motherhood, making a major final remarkable. But this Czech doubles team is quickly rising up the ranks. I mean, they're not to be messed with.
Yeah, I mean, they have that all-time career slam, which is huge. And that was actually, Katie and Taylor, I didn't call that match. I followed it pretty closely. They had that match by the throat and they just couldn't close it out. But for Katie to Katie McNally makes back-to-back US Open doubles finals with different partners.
Mm-hmm.
And I had Taylor Townsend on my mat or on my court for a few matches in Cincinnati, and to see her come back and she was wearing the like cat suit sort of onesie. She is obviously proud of where she's been and where she's come.
Yep.
And I think that if she can continue to, be confident and build off of that, that's huge. Also, the win for Rajiv Ram and Joe Salisbury successfully defending their title. I thought that was amazing. And how about Dita de Groot going back to back in the wheelchair singles, being able to win 2 calendar slams in a row?
Amazing.
That is insane. And on the wheelchair note, to have junior wheelchairs at a slam for the first time, I called the girls junior final in wheelchair. And, if you talk about development of a sport and how well-rounded is tennis and what are pipelines, being more inclusive and having the junior wheelchairs, no other slam has done that. So I thought that was huge for the USTA to do too.
It was great. It was just a tremendous event all the way around. Props to everybody that had a role in putting on one of the best US Opens we've seen. Nick, the last thing I have for you, you mentioned it. You're going on Saturday for the Laver Cup. We'll see if the world team can kind of break through, but it's been tough recently. But how excited are you for this event? What do you think we should realistically expect here on the court?
I mean, I think we should realistically expect a Team Europe win. I mean, let's be honest. I would love to see, and we have seen some really competitive Laver Cups, but it's definitely stacked against Team World. But that's kind of the beauty of it. And we know these guys at their top level can challenge any of sort of the star-studded Team Europe. I am going to be fascinated to see what London's like the week of the Queen's funeral. I arrive on Sunday and the funeral's on Monday. I don't think that'll impact Laver Cup at all. I don't think they're expecting, play starts on Thursday or Friday.
Yeah.
And are we going to see Rafa, as you said, and are we going to see Roger? I think that Basel has been the target. I don't know if that target has moved. We haven't seen Raj, what is it, since Wimbledon
Last year.
Yeah. So, I know that there's been a lot of struggle with the body, like more than maybe they anticipated, but there really is no event like Laver Cup. I think some people are still kind of getting used to it, and I think that a Team World upset or like some sort of, surprising result would help the event. But I hear it's sellout crowds, and I do love Labor Cup just does it a little bit differently, and I think that's what we need in tennis, is for people to continue to try to do things differently to grab new fans. Everything does not need to be the same. Yeah.
Individual athletes like tennis players, they still yearn to be part of a team. So I think this event really gives them that opportunity to kind of experience what they missed out that some of the other sports had, that camaraderie of cheering together. And I, the first edition of it was amazing, and you started to see the players buy in. That's how this has really taken off. The fans love it because the players care. So I'm excited. I won't say I'm rooting for a world victory, but it would be nice if we had some more parity. And
I mean, we are two Americans. What are we? The team world is 0-4. So
last year was a bad one too. So we'll see. Nick McCarvel, pleasure having you on. We'll have to do this again. Thanks for joining Tennis Channel Insight, and best of luck in all your side hustles, but also the main ones too. We'll be following you in the tennis calendar on our television screens for sure. But thanks for coming on Tennis Channel Insight In.
Thanks, Mitch. I appreciate it.